Hey friends, this is PV here, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is this opening hand, as you highlighted right after, is that I think it's a keep. Because the way this hand works, you effectively have two lands with hub and a tune, and we can consider you have 24 lands left in your deck, because you have 21 lands and 3 attunes left. And in some hands, drawing in a tune later on is not going to be good enough, but in this hand, you have 2 to drop removal spells, so even if you don't draw a land immediately or in a tune, you can go Aether Hub attune, then land go, then you can Harness Lightning something or not. And if you draw an attune on the third turn, which is the worst case scenario for attune, you can still cast that and cast a 2-mana removal spell. So you're still fine against a lot of decks. And with 24 outs left in your deck, 53 cards, you have about 85% chance to draw a third land on turn 3, which is, plenty. And once you do that, you have Rogue Refiner to get you out the gate. So I think this hand is basically a must keep. I think unless you specifically know that Harness Lightning is a dead card against your opponent, I would keep this hand, and even then I might keep anyway. So yeah, that definitely would. And I like that you wrote down here, was the opening 7 a keep, because it tells me what you're thinking about and what you consider a hard decision, so I can talk about that decision in case I wasn't going to talk about it originally. So that's a good thing that you did. I hope everyone does that in the future. Your next interesting decision point is in turn 3, where you can play a Ruler Virtuosa or a Rogue Refiner. And I think I would have just played Rogue Refiner here, because Rogue Refiner is the better card in this spot. Like you don't have, you're lacking lands and you're lacking imported action. You can't even play Woodland Wanderer. You only have 1 energy from the Aether Hub. So you really want Rogue Refiner to resolve more than you want Ruler Virtuosa to resolve. So I think you should play Rogue Refiner immediately, because then it can only be countered by Censor. There are some spots in which you want to play your weaker spells first, because they'll be countered anyway. But in this spot, if you play Ruler Virtuoso now, you're just opening yourself to get your Rogue Refiner countered by Supreme Will and Disallow on top of Censor. And I think that is something that you don't want to happen. I think you want this 1 card more than you want the 3 energy and the potential to make energy doubles. In different hand, this could have been different. If those are Brazen or 2 Harness Lightnings, then maybe, wow, the Ruler Virtuoso is the more important card to resolve. So I'm going to try to sneak it in before my opponent has Disallow or Supreme Will mana. But in a hand like this specifically, I think Rogue Refiner is the better card to try to resolve immediately. So I would have just played Rogue Refiner here in turn 3, because I think you are in a much better spot if that resolves in turn 3 than if Virtuoso resolves in turn 3. So if Virtuoso, you just play it and it doesn't really do much to advance your game plan. And at least Rogue Refiner is going to give you an extra card, which might let you play, a Wonder next turn if your opponent taps off or something like that. So I think you should have played Rogue Refiner. Next interesting spot is on turn 6, where there are 2 things I want to talk about. The first one is you have the option of playing Woodland Wanderer or activating Lumbering Falls and attacking Gideon. And I think you chose correctly. I think attacking with Lumbering Falls is better. Why is that? One, it plays better around cards like Fumigate, which most of those blue-white decks do play. So if you just play Wanderer and attack, your opponent's going to Fumigate, and then you're going to be in trouble. Because your opponent can actually get in your Lumbering Falls at that point, so you can never kill it again. And the second thing is that I believe if your opponent was playing a deck that had Torrential Gearhulk in it, then maybe you would have played Woodland Wanderer first. Because the way the game is going to play out now is that you're going to attack, and your opponent is, I assume, going to get rid of your Rogue Refiner. And then next turn, if they go land go, then it's really bad for you to just activate Lumbering Falls and attack into a Gearhulk, because at that point, you just lose your Lumbering Falls, and you're probably not going to win the game. And attacking with the Lumbering Falls this turn kind of prices you into attacking it with the next turn too. It's like a 2-turn commitment. So I think if you're going to attack now, you should plan to the fact that you're going to attack next turn too. But since your opponent is playing blue-white and not blue-red, most of those decks don't run Torrential Gearhulk anyway, so I think your play is fine. I think you can just try to kill it twice with Lumbering Falls. Your opponent will kill the Cub, not the Rogue Refiner. And the second thing that I think is worth talking about is that you should definitely attack with the Rogue Refiner as well here. Because a lot of those decks play Blast Alliance, which is sacrificing attacking creatures. So if you attack with the Rogue Refiner, even though it's going to deal no damage, that means you can sacrifice it if your opponent plays Blast Alliance. And then you get to deal 5 damage as opposed to, you deal 5 damage instead of 3, and that will actually end up killing the Gideon. So it's a huge difference. And there's basically no cost for you. You're not going to block a Gideon attack anyway. And there's nothing that punishes it because you're being tapped. So it's a free way to play around that card that those decks do play. And it's something that I think you notice a little bit later. Because this turn you attack with the Rogue Refiner. So it's basically the exact same thing. Here I think it's correct to attack Gideon with Lemurfalls instead of playing the Wanderer. Because otherwise your opponent will just Gideon the Wanderer and you can't even kill Gideon next turn. So even if your opponent has nothing, it doesn't really work out well for you. So I think you did well here. And I think the rest of this game is honestly pretty academic. There's basically nothing you could. Then you have a bunch of removal spells and your opponent has all untargetable stuff. So you're going to lose this game from here on no matter what. And then I want to talk about sideboarding a little bit. So here in sideboarding, I think you're in trouble because you have more cards that you want to take out than cards that you want to bring in. So for the matchup like this, you really don't want your deck to have a Braids or Harness Lightning. Sorry, this is the main deck. So you don't want your deck to have a Braids or Harness Lightnings, and if you have a card like Magma Spray, you also don't want that. So ideally, you have at least 8 cards to bring in. And cards that you really want to bring in here, I think, are 3 Negates and 2 Invasive Surgeries. So you actually didn't see any sorceries for Invasive Surgeries, but I think we can conclude that your opponent is going to play them, because those blue-white decks do play them a lot. So your opponent is probably going to have Approach or the Second Sons, and they're probably going to have some sort of sweeper like a Fumigate. So this is what I would expect them to have. And while those are only 2 cards in the deck, so you're not going to have a lot of targets, they're very important targets. So I think having Invasive Surgery is worth it, even if it's just for those 2 cards. So I think Surgery and Negate are the best cards you have, and that's 5. Then you have Aethersphere Harvester, which is, not good, obviously, but it's better than anything else. And Sky Sovereign, which is also not good, but better than anything else. And that leaves you with 1 card that is going to be awful. So no matter what card it is, it's going to be bad. And you can choose between, I think, one of the energy generators. So Harness Lightning or Confiscation Coup. And I would honestly just go with Harness Lightning because in a lot of spots, that's just a 2 mana, make 3 energy, which becomes make a 1/1. So that's not good, but I think it's better than what you have, better than your alternatives. It can also pump a Longtusk Cub for 1, or add some mana with Aether Hub. It has uses even though it's not good. And I think having this happen, it's probably a mistake with how the deck is constructed. So I don't think you can have a card as bad as Harness Lightning in your deck in game 2 against those decks. It's not that I don't think you can have, it's that I think you should have. So I think you should change your sideboard to accommodate the fact that you really want to take out 8 cards. Like you told me that you kept the main deck the same and you changed the sideboard a little bit. So let's look what the sideboard previously was. So this is the list that you copied, right? The winner of Japanese Nationals. We can see that he has the same 8 cards that you want to take out, but what does he bring in? 2 Tireless Strikers, 1 Invasive Surgery, 1 Chandra, 3 Negates, and 1 Nisa. So that's 8 cards that are actively good against control, and that's not a coincidence. Your opponent is bringing in this person is bringing in 8 cards because they have 8 cards to take out. This is how they designed their deck. And in your case, you'll have 8 cards to take out, and you realistically only want to bring in 5. Like the other 3, 2 are bad and 1 is horrible. So this is something that I think you have to pay some attention to, because, generally, obviously, you cannot prepare for all matchups, but there is a large category, I think, in Standard right now, at least of decks that are removal is bad against this deck. Like I think blue-white is a popular deck. Blue-black is a popular deck. Though blue-black has some creatures you can Harness Lightning them, but you still don't really want a lot of this type of effect. So I think even though you might not have a full 8 cards to bring in like this person does, you really should have more than 5. 5 is just too few. And here I see that you actually struggle a little bit with what the last sideboard slot should be. So originally you have 2 Invasive Surgeries and 1 slot. Then you end up cutting 1 surgery for 2 Radiant Flames. And I don't really understand why you did that. I think, cutting surgery is probably because you didn't see any sorceries or because you assumed your opponent had not that many sorceries. But again, those are the ones that they probably have are really important. So I think they're worth counting. And I think Radiant Flames is probably one of your worst cards in the sideboard. So I can see 2 reasons why you did that make some sense. The first reason is that you're afraid of Regal Caracal, which is a card that those decks often have in the sideboard and often as a far off. So Radiant Flames answers that. but they're probably not going to bring it in against you. So it's not something like that card is for mono red. So it's not something that I would count on my opponent bringing it against Team Energy. And if they don't have that, you're going to have a dead card. And the second thing is that your opponent can have a Sphinx of the Final Word, which you saw on game 1. And then you can attack, and they block, and then you can Radiant Flames to finish off the Sphinx. And that is something that can happen, but it's, I think, unlikely to happen. And I would rather not have that situation off a card in my deck in game 2. So while I think this reasoning could potentially make sense, I think having Invasive Surgery is better. And I think having Harness Lightning is probably better. Anyway, so you did see 2 Sphinxes, so I don't think it's completely unreasonable to have Radiant Flames for that exact scenario. But a lot of times where if that happens, you're not going to win anyway, because you're going to lose your creature, you're going to lose more of your creatures because you're going to have Radiant Flames for 2 or even 3. And if your opponent counters the Radiant Flames, you just suicide all your creatures. So I think this scenario in which Radiant Flames is good is very unlikely to happen, and a card like Invasive Surgery is more likely to be good. Then I want to highlight turn 3 here. So you play turn 2 Servant because you don't have Cub in your hand yet. And then on turn 3, you can play Servant or Cub. And I think playing Cub first is better because Cub, you don't need the Servant mana for anything now, and Cub is a type of card that scales much better. So the earlier you play Cub, the better it's going to be. Whereas Servant is the same on turns 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. So Cub can actually just kill your opponent if you play it early. You get a huge advantage by playing it early. Whereas for Servant, you get nothing. So I would just, because you don't need the mana right now. So I would just play Cub here in turn 3. And the other thing is that you should play, if you're going to play Game Trail, which you should play your card before you attack. So normally, we're used to just attacking and then playing something, but in a scenario like this, you are just exposing your 2-drop to a Censor. So given that your opponent plays Censor, he's playing blue, or they're playing blue, you've already seen that, you've already seen Censor. So what you should do to protect yourself is just play your 2-drop, whichever one it is. I would play Cub, but even if you're playing Servant, play your 2-drop first, then they can't Censor it because you're going to have the Servant untapped. Then you attack for 2. So that is basically just protecting yourself at no cost. The only reason I can see to play Servant here instead of Cub is that you want to play the Scarab God on the next turn, on turn 4, and still be able to pay for Censor. So that would be, a spot in which you would need 6 mana. But I think at that point your opponent can Supreme Will it or disallow it anyway. And you don't really want to play the Scarab God in this board. It's not like it's going to do anything. Like, obviously it's good, it's 5/5, but you're not going to protect it from a counterspell by playing it too early. So the incentives are just not there. I think you want to wait until a point where you were attacking with a card such as Longtusk Cub, and then your opponent is going to use a removal spell, and then you can play the Scarab God. That is the spot in which you should play it. Here, turn 5 is, I think, actually very interesting because the thing you did was you attacked, you played Cub, you played Sharpshooter Thicket. Actually, you played the Thicket and then you played the Cub. And I think you should do this a little bit different because the key here is that you don't really want another mana source unless your servants die. So you don't know if you want to play or cycle that Thicket yet, because you don't know if you need a 5th mana next turn or not. As of right now, you don't need a 5th mana. So how can you know? I think the way you know is that you play Longtusk Cub first. So you attack, and before you do anything, you play Longtusk Cub. Or actually, you can just play Longtusk Cub first before attacking because it can't be Supreme Bolt because you have those servants untapped. But say that you attacked, then you play the Cub. If your opponent does not counter the Cub, then that means that there's a chance they have Fumigate. If your opponent counters the Cub here, as they did with Fester a little bit, so you play Cub, your opponent Supreme Wills it. So that means your opponent is not going to Fumigate you. If your opponent would Fumigate you, then they wouldn't counter the Cub, right? That makes sense. Like if your opponent has a way of just sweeping your board next turn, they would just let it resolve and either do something else or cycle the Supreme Will, or just Impulse, or even do nothing, but keep their Supreme Will and try to Fumigate you. I think this is what would happen. So even, and I don't think they will actually Fumigate only those 2 servants. So if they counter the Cub, even if they don't have a Fumigate, or if they do and don't have a 5th land, but they draw that, they're not going to cast it next turn probably, because you can just play something better that they can't answer. So I think what you're going to do here, if they counter it, that means they're not fumigating. If they don't counter it, that means there's a big chance that they fumigated. So if your opponent does not counter the cub, then I would play my land, because that means you can definitely, if they untap and fumigate, which is possible because they didn't counter it, then you can just play the Glorybringer no matter what. So I would play the land to guarantee the Glorybringer. But if your opponent does counter it, that means your servants are very likely going to live. So I would just cycle the land, because you don't need more mana, and I would cycle the land main phase, in case I drew something like another game trail, just to make sure. But there's no reason to do it at the end of the turn. You can just do it main phase because you haven't played a land yet. But I would do that. So in a scenario where the game would progress, you play cub, they counter it, then I would just cycle the thicket here. Does that make sense? Because he's trying to plan ahead for the next few turns and trying to understand what's going to happen to your servants based on what happened to your Longtusk Cub. So I think this is a pretty interesting spot here that, it's not very common, but I think it's really worth talking about. So you in game 2, you don't change anything in game 3. And here, this is your opening hand, and I would mulligan that. I think this hand, it just needs too much to get going. Like first of all, you need red mana to begin with. Then you can, otherwise you cannot cast a single card, or you not want to cast a single card. And then even if you draw land, you still need a lot more than that, because you need 5 lands, 2 of which have to be red to do anything with Glorybringer. And you don't have any other, you don't have any 2s, you don't have any other 3 drops, like Whirl of Virtuoso, you don't even have any energy, so you can't really, it's going to be a 2-3 with a token. You don't have any 4 drops, so you don't have anything going for you. This hand needs too much. And I think when you play against a deck like Blue-White, the way that you win is that you pressure, because they are a really good deck in the mid to late game. They have a lot of card drawing, have a lot of counter spells. You're not going to win that way. But their weakness is that their removal is bad. So the removal in Blue-White is removal that has to be played when you attack. Like they can't just, a deck like Blue-Red can just take the damage and upgrade your creature at the end of the turn. Blue-White cannot do that. They have to tap out. And the way you win the game is that you play a creature, you attack, and you force them to kill it. And then once they kill it, you play something that they can't deal with, like a Chandra, for example. Or, even a bigger creature, like even a Whirl of Virtuoso with a lot of energy, or a Woodland Wanderer, or, a Scarab God. You play something. So the way that you win is you pressure them enough that they have to use the removal spells, and then you play a big threat. So this list doesn't actually have a lot of huge threats, like you only play 2 Chandra, for example, that are really must counters. But this is, in general, how you beat a deck like Blue-White. You exploit their weakness of having attack stat-based removal spells. And this hand can never do that. So I don't think you can keep this hand. I think you're better off with 6. Here there's an interesting spot where you don't play Whirl of Virtuoso on turn 3. And I think that's correct. Because playing it on turn 3 is 2 things. First, it lets them censor it, which is, it's not the end of the world for you, because they will just end up censoring a Glorybringer anyway later in the game, probably. Or they can just cycle it. But you'd still rather they don't have the option of censoring it, and you don't have a turn 4 play. So the game's going to go turn 3 Virtuoso, they censor it, and turn 4 you pass. So it's better if you can just turn 4 Virtuoso, then they can't censor it. And the second thing is that turn 4 is the key turn for the draw spells. They have Glimmers, and they have the Illumination. So if you played Whirl of Virtuoso on turn 3 and they counter it, then they aren't wasting a turn, because turn 3 is a turn where they would do nothing anyway. But if you play it on turn 4, then if they want to counter it, that means they cannot play Glimpse or the Illumination. So they're actually losing a turn compared to the other play. And that means that, maybe you'll play Glorybringer the following turn. Then they have to deal with it. They cannot play Glimmer either. And then all of a sudden, they don't have an answer for the next Glorybringer, because they didn't have the chance to play Glimmer before. So I think your play here is good. I would have done what you did, which is, waiting until turn 4 and then playing that on turn 4. Here in turn 5, you don't draw another red, so you can't play your Glorybringer. Then your opponent plays Glimmer of Genius. And in this spot, I would negate it. I think, you already have Invasive Surgery if you really want to counter something like a Fumigate, or even, later in the game approach. or in the case we've seen, our devastation from your opponent, or our revelation, whatever the way ours is called, revelation, I think. But you already have one, and your opponent missed a land drop last turn. So there's a chance that your opponent, if your opponent doesn't draw a land, they won't be able to do anything. And the blue white is a deck that, it really wants to make its lands drops. Its kill condition costs 7, and it has to have lands to be able to react to your spells, to your creatures, and counter the things that you play. So it's, again, the scenario that I talked about previously, where you're going to force your opponent to do something, and then they won't be able to answer whatever it is that you have because they'll be tapped out. So by countering the Glimmer, I think you just drastically lower the chance that they play lands on turns 5, 6, 7. So the chance that they're able to do that to you is much lower. And the negate is not really doing anything else for you here. So there's a chance your opponent just taps and plays a Gideon, and +1s on your Virtuoso, and still has, you don't draw a red land, so you can't Glorybringer it, but I think that is relatively unlikely to happen, and even if it does, it's not the end of the world. I think negating the Glimmer here is the better play. And then the last interesting spot here is, I think, when your opponent resolves a Glimmer, they play a couple lands, and then they cast another Glimmer, and now you again have the chance to counter it or not. And in this spot, I would do as you did. I would not counter it, because at this point, your opponent already has plenty of lands, and they're only looking for something specific, like a Swipper, for example, which they do eventually find. And then in this spot, I would much rather keep my negate to counter the important cards that they play. So the thing is that the difference between the first Glimmer and the second is that in the first, they really want lands, and they wanted multiple lands, and you cannot negate the lands anyway, so you might as well negate the Glimmer. We're in a spot of the game where I think your best chance of winning is constraining your opponent on mana, which is not always the case, but was the case back then. In this spot, your opponent is casting the Glimmer not to find lands, but to find specific answers, probably. So it's better to just negate those answers directly, because if your opponent does not find them, or your opponent spends time casting them, as they did spend time casting the Hour of Revelation, then you can answer those instead, and I think that's a better play. So the rest of it is, I think pretty standard. I think I agree with everything that you did. Obviously, you got really unlucky with this hand. This is something that can happen with this deck, especially the 4-color version. Obviously, it's not always going to be this extreme. You're never going to draw, 4 Glorybringers and have 7 lands but no to red and no black. But it is something that you subject yourself to happening if you play even the 3-color version, but way more so the 4-color version. But yeah, I think other than the things that I highlighted, I agree with your plays.